Kodak was once a household name. For decades, people spoke of Kodak moments to describe their most precious memories. The company dominated photography completely, that it felt untouchable. But behind the success was a story of missed opportunities and stubborn choices. This is the story of how Kodak rose to the top, invented the very technology that would change photography forever, and then lost it all. The Kodak story begins in 1888, when George Eastman introduced the very first Kodak camera. It was a simple box-shaped device preloaded with film for 100 exposures. When the roll was finished, customers mailed the entire camera back to Kodak. The company developed the film, printed the photos, and returned the camera reloaded for another round. This was revolutionary. Photography had been a complex, technical process reserved for professionals. Eastman's invention made it accessible to ordinary people. His slogan captured the magic: "You press the button, we do the rest." 12 years later, in 1900, Kodak released the Brownie camera, a cheap portable box camera that brought photography into millions of homes. Suddenly, family snapshots, vacations, and everyday moments could be preserved forever. Over the next few decades, Kodak kept innovating. They refined film technology, expanded into professional cameras, and became the go-to supplier for both amateurs and serious photographers. By the 1920s, Kodak was already a global brand, with factories and offices around the world. Then came a breakthrough. In 1935, Kodak introduced Kodachrome film, which gave the world vibrant color photography. This cemented Kodak's place not just in family albums, but in art, journalism, and Hollywood. They supplied motion picture film to the movie industry and later expanded into medical imaging, making Kodak a name tied to science as well as memories. By the mid-20th century, Kodak was everywhere. They weren't just selling cameras and film. The brand name itself became a synonym for photography. Kodak's business model was brilliant. Cameras were sold cheaply, but film and processing brought in enormous profits. Every roll of film meant more money for Kodak. And with nearly 90% of the US South film market, they were printing a lot of money as well as pictures. Their products touched every corner of life. Vacation snapshots, wedding albums, Hollywood movies, even medical scans, all carried the Kodak name. For decades, Kodak was the undisputed king of everything in photography. At its peak, Kodak employed over 140,000 people worldwide and was one of the most valuable companies in America. It was impossible to imagine photography without Kodak. In 1975, a young Kodak engineer named Steven Sasson built something extraordinary: the world's first digital camera. It was clunky, recorded black and white images onto a cassette tape, and took almost a minute to capture a single photo. But it worked, and it was the future. Kodak's executives didn't see it that way. They worried digital photography would destroy their film business, the very thing that made them billions. So instead of embracing the invention, they buried it. Kodak kept investing in film, convinced that people would never abandon it. But while Kodak hesitated, rivals moved forward. Sony stepped in first. In 1981, they introduced the Mavica, an electronic still camera that stored images on floppy disks. It wasn't perfect, but it showed consumers that photography could be digital, fast, and convenient. Sony's strength in consumer electronics meant they could experiment boldly, without fear of losing a film empire. Canon followed in 1984 with the RC-701, a camera designed for professionals. Journalists used it at the Los Angeles Olympics, proving that digital photography wasn't just a gimmick, it was practical. Canon built on its reputation for lenses and optics, laying the foundation for its future dominance in digital SLRs. Nikon entered later, but decisively. In 1999, they launched the Nikon D1, a professional-grade digital SLR that quickly became the industry standard. It was rugged, fast, and integrated seamlessly with Nikon's existing lens system. For photojournalists and professionals, the D1 was the moment digital became serious. Each of these companies treated digital as an opportunity. They invested, improved, and built ecosystems around it. Kodak, meanwhile, clung to film, releasing digital cameras only reluctantly, and often with confusing strategies, like tying them to printing services instead of embracing pure digital workflows. The irony is clear. Kodak invented the future, but others sold it. By the time Kodak finally tried to catch up, Sony, Canon, and Nikon had already captured the market and the imagination of photographers worldwide. By the late 1990s, Kodak was struggling to find its place in the digital world. They had finally released their first consumer digital cameras in the 1995, the Kodak DC-40, followed by the DC-20 and DC-25 in 1996. These were pocket-sized, affordable, and even included early features like LCD screens and memory cards. But by then, Canon and Nikon were already popular with professionals. Kodak's late entry meant they were no longer leading the conversation. Soon, another wave of disruption sealed Kodak's fate: the smartphone. As iPhones and Android devices put powerful cameras in everyone's pocket, the need for standalone digital cameras collapsed. People no longer carried a Kodak, they carried a phone. Kodak had no foothold in this new market, and its consumer business evaporated almost overnight. The company's biggest mistake was clinging to its old business model. For decades, Kodak had thrived on selling film and processing. But digital cameras didn't need film, and smartphones soon made standalone cameras unnecessary. Kodak's profits evaporated almost overnight. By the 2000s, Kodak was losing billions. They tried diversifying into printers and other businesses, but nothing could replace the film empire they had built. In 2012, Kodak filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection in the United States. It was the end of an era, marking its dominance, but not the end of the company itself. To survive, Kodak sold off many of its valuable patents to tech giants like Apple and Google. These patents, covering digital imaging and photo technology, were worth billions and helped Kodak pay its debts. The company then restructured, shifting away from consumer cameras. Instead, Kodak focused on commercial printing, packaging, and specialty chemicals. They also kept a foothold in imaging services, but on a much smaller scale. Today, Kodak still exists, but it is a shadow of its former self. The brand name lives on in niche products and licensing deals, but it no longer defines photography. For most people, Kodak is a memory, a reminder of family albums, vacation snapshots, and the golden age of film. Kodak's rise and fall is more than a business story. It's a cautionary tale, which shows what happens when a company fears change instead of embracing it. Now, what are the lessons we can learn from the fall of Kodak? Let's take a look at them. Lesson 1. Innovation must be embraced, not buried. Kodak invented the digital camera, but treated it as a threat. By suppressing their own breakthrough, they handed the future to their rivals. Lesson 2. Don't cling to old business models. Kodak's profits came from film and processing, but digital technology made that model obsolete. Instead of adapting, Kodak tried to protect the past and lost the future. Lesson 3. Disruption doesn't wait. Smartphones prove that. Even successful digital cameras could be replaced. Companies that fail to anticipate the next wave of change risk being left behind. Lesson 4. Market leadership is never permanent. Kodak once controlled 90% of the film market. Within a generation, that dominance vanished. No company is too big to fail if it ignores reality. Kodak's journey is a story of brilliance and blindness. They gave the world the gift of easy photography, turned memories into Kodak moments, and even invented the digital camera. But when the future arrived, they chose to protect the past. The rise of rivals, the collapse of film, and the disruption of smartphones all combined to bring down a giant that once seemed untouchable. Kodak is a textbook example of a company that invented the future but refused to live in it. And that leaves us with a question. Which companies today might be repeating Kodak's mistake, clinging to old models while the next disruption is already here? Let me know in the comments.